Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming. My name is Carl Nathy with the University of Kentucky Office of Public Relations and Marketing. It's my privilege to serve as your Master of Ceremonies this morning for an important announcement, once again from UK Healthcare. To date, a cure for Parkinson's disease remains elusive for the more than 50,000 Americans who are diagnosed yearly, despite decades of intensive study. But a newly approved treatment that may help ease the symptoms of Parkinson's has shown remarkable promise. Dr. John Slevin, to my immediate right, Professor of Neurology and Vice Chair of Research at UK's Kentucky Neuroscience Institute, worked with a team of international investigators to explore the efficacy of a new drug called Duoopa, which uses a novel process to more efficiently administer levodopa, a common Parkinson's disease drug. The results were exceptional, and Duoopa was approved by the FDA this past January. Dr. Slevin received his medical degree from West Virginia University. He then completed neurology residency at the University of Virginia and a fellowship in neuropharmacology at Johns Hopkins University. Dr. Slevin specializes in the treatment of movement disorders, including Parkinson's disease, and has authored more than 200 abstracts, book chapters, and research papers. It is my pleasure to present to you Dr. John Slevin of the Kentucky Neuroscience Institute. Dr. Slevin.
Good afternoon, or morning, whichever it is at this point. I'm going to talk a little bit first about Parkinson's disease. As many of you probably know, it's a progressive neurodegenerative disease. A large part of the signs and symptoms are caused by dopamine-producing cells in the brain. The manifestations of the illness include certain motor skill difficulties as well as non-motor symptoms. The motor skill difficulties include what probably many have recognized, this so-called pill-rolling tremor, as well as stiffness and slowness, some difficulty with gait. Non-motor symptoms include difficulties maintaining blood pressure when you stand up, loss of sense of smell, and also constipation and other gastric mobility problems. The challenge in treating Parkinson's disease patients as the disease progresses is to continue to manage symptoms. What happens as the disease progresses is that medications tend to lose effect. Levodopa, the gold standard for probably nearly 50 years, is a prime example. As the disease progresses, the smoothness with which patients can be treated early on is lost, so that they may have end of dose wearing off. They may have fluctuations in the middle of the course of a medication given by mouth. They may develop after a certain number of years what are called dyskinesias, these abnormal writhing-like movements that you may have seen some celebrities show on television have Parkinson's disease. All of these become very difficult to treat. Part of that, of course, is the loss of these dopamine neurons in the brain. But in addition to that, because of things like gastric motility problems, gastric emptying problems, patients fail to achieve a steady state blood level and their level of levodopa being turned into dopamine. One way around that would be to avoid taking pills that have to sit in the stomach and be delivered in a sporadic manner. The way to get around that would be directly to that place in the essence where levodopa is absorbed by the body. And that led to the development of Duoopa. What happens here is that levodopa in a special intestinal gel preparation is delivered directly to that site by means of tubes that are connected to a pump. The pump holds cassettes of the levodopa, and then that delivers it 16 hours a day, a milliliter or a dribble at a time, so that the blood level and thereby brain level is constant. And that reduces the probability of having intermittent dyskinesias, intermittent wearing off, and the like. And this drug has now been available since, I think you said the FDA approved it in January, and after having been studied by numerous patients in several clinical trials, it's now available for standard of care for patients with later stage Parkinson's disease that experience these problems.
Very good. Thank you, Dr. Slevin. Marion Cox is a farmer and former real estate developer from Georgetown. He was diagnosed with Parkinson's 16 years ago. He has experienced firsthand the frustrations of Parkinson's disease, including decline of motor skill function and the loss of effectiveness of his oral medications to treat the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. Marion was in our clinical trial for Duoopa and will be among patients in Kentucky to receive Duoopa as standard of care following its approval by the FDA. So Marion, alongside of Marion this morning, is his wife Becky, and we thank Becky for being here as well. And Marion, we'd like to hear a little bit about your story. Thank you.
Thank you. Life with Parkinson's has truly been a challenge. Things that you take for granted, don't do it because they may not happen one day. I have had it for 16 years and have been on the program since for the last 3 years. Oral medication, as Dr. Slevin pointed out, works great for a period of time, but its effectiveness decreases over time, which leads to difficulty in walking, talking, swallowing, staggering around. Falling down becomes a norm as opposed to an exception. And these kind of activities made it very difficult to continue farming, which is sort of one of my passions. You would think that standing still would be easy. Anybody can do it. Maybe so, maybe not. Parkinson's has proved to me that some things you expect to be easy are difficult. I was offered the opportunity to be in the Duoopa trial, and I jumped at it. I was losing ground, and I needed to do something to improve it. Dr. Slevin brought this to my attention, and it's the best thing that ever happened to me. The improvements have been that great. It's actually, I refer to it as a new lease on life. Where I came from versus where I am. It's hard for me to believe, and it was in my skin. But I can still smile. I don't do it very much. With the Duoopa, I get around better. I can get dressed without assistance. I never thought I'd hear myself saying that. I guess you could say I'm not as good as I once was with before Parkinson's, but I'm darn good shape and can do what I want to do when I want to do it, and that says a lot. I want to thank Dr. Slevin. I want to thank Renee Wagner and the entire UK medical staff and my lovely wife Becky for supporting me through these challenges. It's difficult. Thank you very much.
You mentioned that. Actually, I'd like to thank all the people, yourself included, who participated in the clinical trial. Without research volunteers like you, these kinds of things don't happen.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Marion. And he's got a tough act to follow, but I think he'll do it just fine. Our last speaker today came to UK Healthcare more than 11 years ago with a commitment and vision to create an advanced academic medical center that would provide the highest level of care for citizens all over the state. And under his leadership, UK Healthcare has grown into a regional referral center that treats patients with the most complex medical problems from not only across Kentucky, but beyond. Regional Referral Center. Please welcome our Executive Vice President for Health Affairs, Dr. Michael Karp. Dr. Karp.
Thank you, Carl. This story is exactly the story of what UK healthcare needs to do. As Carl said, 11 years ago, we committed to make sure that Kentuckians could have access to the very best of healthcare, regardless of how complex or how uncommon their problems were, and not have to worry whether their insurance will allow them to go to the Mayo Clinic or the Cleveland Clinic. Parkinson's is fortunately not an uncommon disease, and it's progressive, and everyone with Parkinson's eventually needs to try different kinds of medication. And only major centers like ours can do clinical trials like this, or clinical trials with neurosurgical interventions, as we also have going on in Parkinson's disease. So I think it's important that we live up to our commitment to be on the cutting edge of medicine. What UK healthcare has to do is not practice the standard of care. We have to move the standard of care forward. And if we can do that, then Kentuckians will have the access to the very best. So to me, this is a very gratifying morning to see the reality of our dream come true. And Duoopa will help you for a long, long period of time. And should you need additional help, hopefully we'll have the opportunity to do that in other ways.
Thank you, Dr. Karp. At this time, we'll open it up for any questions for members of the news media or any of our speakers here this morning.
Dr. Slevin, how many participants were there in the clinical trial?
Locally, there were 11, but in the entire, well, there were several phases of trials. The double-blind, so-called double-blind, double-dummy had 60 to 70 patients in it. Data used for the FDA included several hundred.
Anyone else? Yes.
So you said that the treatment is for later stage Parkinson's. At some point, do you think it will just become the standard of care from day one, or is there a reason to wait?
There is a reason to wait. Firstly, it's an invasive procedure, putting the tube in, so there is some risk for that. And early on, patients generally respond well to levodopa oral preparations without the fluctuation. It's only after a number of years when they start experiencing this end of dose wearing off, dyskinesias, and other side effects that we have to find a better way to deliver them by mouth. And this is one of those ways. And what this does later on when patients have these problems is smooth them out, either taking it all away or minimizing it. And in that regard, one of the things I ask our 11 patients here after every single visit was, well, are you glad with this, or do you want to quit and go back to pills? And every patient, no matter what their level of improvement, categorically said, no way. You know, that's way back in the past. This is new. This is what I want now.
Any other questions?
Doc, will see him still shaking or moving, will that ever completely cease?
By the way, yeah, you know well what this is. This is dyskinesia. This is that abnormal movement that comes about. Usually doesn't, but it is worse if you're anxious and you're in front of a crowd like a press conference delivering information. So that's some of this, but that's one of the advantages of this. We can adjust the pump and the flow rate to change the amount of medication that's being delivered. And so in the study, and also actually in patients who get it for standard of care, the idea will be that they'll bring in a calendar of, say, the prior 3 days before the visit, documenting how they're doing. And based upon whether they have more Parkinson's symptoms or more evidence of dyskinesia of too much and the like, we can adjust the pump to continually try to keep them in that neutral middle zone where they're as close to normal as possible.
Is it fair to say that you have not defeated Parkinson's, but you've come closer to defeating it?
Sad to say, we don't have a cure, but this treatment extends our ability to manage the signs and symptoms beyond where we could earlier.
Very good.
So it's my understanding that was a trial, and why was there a need for this to be one of the largest clinical trials? Can you speak to that?
Well, it's a large clinical trial, as all what are called phase 3 clinical trials before drugs are approved by the FDA. Part of that's part of the FDA mandate. You have to have large trials. Mm-hmm. They have to be in multiple centers, and that's to reduce bias in a particular site or with a particularly low number. They're also done blinded. In Parkinson's disease, you obviously can't use a placebo because that won't be very blinded, but you do what are called double dummy trials. And so in this particular set of trials, patients were given both oral medication, at least initially, oral medication and or the pump. And the medicine was either delivered through the pump or delivered by pill, and the other was the placebo. I or the other investigators nor the patients knew who was getting which. And then at the end of a certain period of time, everyone was switched to the Duoopa through the pump. The data the FDA looked at was the early data, the first 12 weeks, and that is who did better. Mm-hmm. The people getting it by mouth, the people getting pump. And clearly it was by pump.
How long was the clinical trial?
Again, the trials, they're the double-blind, double-dummy, of which there were several, lasted weeks, 12, 14, 16 weeks. They were variable among the different trials. And then all the patients had the opportunity to switch to definitely knowing they were getting Duoopa. And then those patients have been followed for years. The shortest is about a year, and the longest is about 5, maybe 6 years, looking for side effects, continued benefit, and the like. So that you've been on it for a number of years.
3 years.
3 years.
Yes.
So we have data both in the blinded fashion, but we also have long-term data on patients who are maintained on it, and just how well they do, and whether or not, another question I was asked, we're maintaining control even this far out into the illness. And the answer, at least on this small number of patients that we've looked at, is yes, we have.
Where was Duoopa developed?
Actually been available in Europe for a number of years. And it was originally developed by a company in Europe, but has subsequently been purchased by AbbVie, which is a subsidiary of Abbott Laboratories in the United States. The company in Europe wanted to introduce it to the North American market, and that required a different set of clinical trials than what you need for the European Union to approve it. But in that regard, it's been used in Europe by large numbers of patients over a decade.
How many universities or how many areas were performing the clinical trials?
I don't know the exact number, but gosh, it was in the scores. Okay. And now we're in the process of training other centers, other medical centers, universities, on the procedures and the mechanisms for setting up the infrastructure to be able to continue doing this.
Does Mr. Cox have to come to the university to have the treatment medicine put into the pump? How does it work exactly?
Would you like to answer? I'll let him answer.
Well, we pick up cartridges. It's much like the cartridge, the old-time fountain pen. You keep the engine and put a little cartridge in. Well, we keep the computer. We pick up cartridges, and we usually get them. Well, we will now get a month's supply, 1 month's supply of the cartridge, or you could think of it as the refill with the Duoopa in
So essentially, it's like taking other medications, except that patients will put in a new cartridge every morning, start the pump up, go through the day, and then turn the pump off at night. They'll still see every 3, 4, 6 months, whatever is established, as they would otherwise. There are problems, like would occur with anything else, they'll still just see their physician on a periodic basis.
What are you able to do now specifically, Mr. Cox, that you weren't able to do prior to starting the trial?
Well, I don't think we've got that much time today. but I can do anything I want to do. I mean, I horseback ride. I've got a team of horses I drive. I've got lots of farm equipment and excavating equipment that I drive. Before I went on the trial, I was still doing those things, but unbelievably slow. I mean, when you talk about, as I mentioned earlier, falling down kind of inhibits some of the things you do. And I'd gotten to the point where I was falling, staggering around like I had too much to drink. I mean, it just made a world of difference. The construction aspect of it, you can't climb around on roofs, inspect foundations, etc. I had gotten to where I couldn't do that. And I was basically doing everything from the pickup truck. Now I'm back on the job. That's sort of.
Mrs. Cox, what has this meant to you?
If we could get the microphone, we weren't anticipating her speaking, but that's fine.
Well, needless to say, when someone you live with, someone you care about, is deteriorating a lot faster than just mere age would cause, it's not a good feeling. And I guess bottom line on this, it's really saved him from an early, very early retirement, and a severe one at that. He's always been a very active person, a very strong person, and although just like anybody else, he's getting older and there's things associated with that, he really is pretty independent at this point. It's really, once he went on the pump, it's really changed our lives very little. I mean, I had to make sure when he was in the trial that I made a run into Lexington about every additional cartridges. But I personally noticed that I really appreciated is as time went by when he was on the oral medications, he had to take more and more tablets, and he had to take them every so many hours. And it got to an unmanageable point, really. There were so many tablets, and it was every 2 hours. He had to carry them with him. Invariably, it seemed like, they didn't get taken quite on time, so he was never quite what he should be. And now, once he puts it on in the morning, it's set to a particular flow rate. He has the ability, if he wants to adjust it up or down, and also to give himself a little extra medicine if he feels like he's slowing down. And it's a set it and forget it kind of thing. So other than wearing this pump and kind of getting used to that, he's off and running like he always used to be. And so that's been a great blessing, really. I can't say enough about it.
How expensive is this treatment?
Really don't know.
We don't know.
Well, obviously, during the clinical trial, there was no cost. Now, the infrastructure nationally to cover and the cost is being determined. In that regard, it is also covered by Medicare, and third-party insurers are coming around. So there will be a substantial cost, but not as much as one would expect since insurers are covering it.
The procedure compared to deep brain stimulation.
Mm-hmm.
I guess they're used for different purposes, really. Is that the case?
Deep brain stimulation is a neurosurgical procedure where an electrode is inserted into an area of the brain to stimulate it to help alleviate symptoms of Parkinson's. Here, a tube is put in the stomach, it's a so-called PEG tube, by a gastroenterologist, and then there's an inner tube that goes inside the sleeve of the PEG tube, and it's threaded to the jejunum where the medication is absorbed. So it is still treating with medication as opposed to a neurosurgical procedure, but it allows for continuous treatment rather than sporadic treatment with pills and the problems that Mrs. Cox described.
I just got to ask one question we talked about in the newsroom regarding this subject. What are
The side effects are the same as they would be with the pills, dyskinesia, and then there are a host of other side effects that can occur. Some patients can have nausea, vomiting, sometimes it can lower your blood pressure. There are a whole list of those things, but they're really the same as the oral medications. And in fact, because it's being delivered in a more steady, stable state, I've experienced in my experience with this, I've seen fewer of those. Although if you read the package insert, as you these labels for medications, there's a whole stream of things that are pretty similar to what they say occurs with the pills.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you. I think that's a good point to stop. Our speakers, Dr. Slevin, Dr. Karp, Marion, I'm sure will be around for a few minutes to answer your questions individually. Thank you all for coming and some very good questions. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for doing this. It's important for people to know about it.
Oh, I agree.
Made a big difference for him, will make a big difference for other people.
That's right. Yeah, thank you.
Stay with her. We'll get it.
Sure.